On a first-class flight from Cape Town to New York, a 74-year-old African grandmother, draped in a vibrant Ghanaian kente shawl, quietly knits a tiny red baby cap. Behind her, a tech CEO leans back, smirks, and places his $1,000 sneakers squarely on her bent back like she's furniture. His friends laugh, filming. No one stops him. No one speaks up. But she keeps knitting. Calm, silent, until a woman in black glances up from her book. Her eyes, cold as steel, flicker once. What happens next will silence the entire cabin and cost that CEO everything. The scent of citrus-scented leather filled the cabin as the Boeing 787 settled into cruise altitude. Soft jazz hummed from the overhead speakers, champagne sparkled in tall flutes, and designer bags rested beneath mahogany-trimmed seats. The first-class section was its own universe, wealth wrapped in silence, privilege marinated in altitude. Naomi Mensah gently adjusted her seat. At 74, her joints moved with care but never hesitance. She wore a deep blue and gold kente shawl wrapped gracefully over her shoulders, a quiet ode to her Ghanaian roots. Her hair, silvery and braided close to the scalp, framed a face etched with time and wisdom. She opened a simple canvas pouch and pulled out 2 knitting needles and a small ball of red wool. Her fingers moved slowly but deliberately, the quiet rhythm of looping yarn, as meditative as a heartbeat. Across the aisle, a loud chuckle broke the silence. "Dude, bro, look at that," Ethan Blake said, jabbing his elbow into his friend's side. The friend, lounging in his custom-tailored suit, leaned forward to look. "What, the blanket?" "No," Ethan scoffed. "The museum exhibit in seat 3C. He tilted his head toward Naomi, who was now leaning slightly forward, eyes focused on her tiny stitches. "Seriously, what century is that shawl from? Did she take a wrong turn at the folklore festival?" Laughter erupted between Ethan and his entourage. 3 men in their late 20s, all decked in luxury athleisure. Ethan, CEO of Vexen AI, a rising tech unicorn, was used to eyes following him. He expected admiration, attention, obedience. But Naomi hadn't so much as looked up. He didn't like that. "Who even let her in here?" he muttered louder now, uncaring of the hush in the cabin. "Isn't there a dress code or something?" Naomi continued knitting. The red yarn slowly formed a round shape, what would later be a baby cap. Her hands didn't tremble, her eyes didn't flinch. The world outside her knitting simply didn't exist. Ethan's voice rose. "This is first class, not some cultural field trip." Several heads turned. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. One woman lowered her noise-canceling headphones but said nothing. A flight attendant approached, but Ethan raised an eyebrow, and she hesitated, then backed away. Naomi leaned forward slightly to pick up a stitch that had slipped. As she did, her back arched. A gentle, unconscious bend. Ethan smirked. "You know what this seat's missing?" he said, glancing at his friends. "A footrest." "No way," one of them grinned. "You wouldn't." Ethan leaned back with theatrical flair, lifted his leg, and gently, at first, rested his sneaker against the curve of Naomi's back. She stiffened. The sensation was unmistakable, rubber pressing into fabric, weight transferring onto her spine. Gasps whispered through the cabin. A few phones lifted, screens blinking to life. The quiet became thicker than noise. "Perfect height," Ethan announced, "and softer than the cheap ones they give us." His friends burst out laughing. One mimicked applause. Another clinked his glass of champagne against Ethan's in mock toast. Naomi didn't speak. Her needles paused for half a second, then continued. Loop, pull, slide. The laughter grew. "Bro, this is going viral," someone said. "Do it again. Smile." Ethan leaned further forward, added pressure with his foot, and laughed louder. Naomi's back bowed slightly. She coughed once. Still, not a word. She reached for the yarn, which had rolled slightly forward, and pulled it gently back into her lap. She adjusted her shawl. She breathed in slowly. Then she said softly, without turning her head, "Excuse me, sir." The laughter quieted a fraction. "I would appreciate it," she continued, "if you removed your shoe from my back." Ethan leaned forward. "What was that?" Her voice remained calm. "I said, please remove your shoe." "Oh," he said mockingly. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were furniture that talks." Laughter again, sharper now, cruel. One of the men patted Ethan on the shoulder. "God, you're killing it today." Behind Naomi, a man cleared his throat. But when Ethan turned and locked eyes with him, the man looked down, suddenly very interested in the stitching on the seat cushion. Naomi lowered her knitting to her lap. She placed her hands atop the red yarn. "I have grandchildren," she said, voice soft but level. "They watch how the world treats the people who raised them. I hope this moment never finds them." Ethan raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. "English, please?" His sneaker pressed again, harder. A click. Not from Naomi, from somewhere else. A book closed. Softly. A woman dressed in all black, seated 2 rows ahead, lowered her hardcover and turned her head. Just slightly. Her gaze was unreadable. She wore her hair in a tight bun, a silver pen clipped to her pocket. No one had noticed her before. Not really. She didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't speak. But she looked directly at Ethan. And then, she turned one page of her book, the smallest motion, but enough. Farther down the cabin, a man rose from his seat. He wore a camera strapped around his neck, a world traveler tag on his bag. He yawned, stretched, and took one silent step forward. Near the front of the cabin, another man adjusted his tie, removed his headphones, and cracked his knuckles. Neither made a sound. Ethan laughed again, unaware of the shifting tides around him. "God, this is gold," he said. "Somebody tag me when this goes viral." The woman in black, Janella Carey, did not laugh. She gently tapped her pen once against her knee, and the red yarn in Naomi's lap quivered, as if it sensed what was coming next. Naomi didn't flinch. Not when the sneaker pressed harder, not when the laughter rose, not when the word furniture was tossed at her like a bone to a stray dog. She simply adjusted her shawl, let her knitting rest gently in her lap, and began again. Loop, pull, slide. Her fingers, though aged, held steady. Every movement whispered patience, resilience, and something else. Something older. A strength that didn't need noise. 2 rows behind her, a young man in a gray hoodie adjusted his seat. He looked to be in his early 20s, college-aged, perhaps. His laptop sat unopened on his tray. His phone, however, was already recording. The boy zoomed in on Ethan, capturing the moment the CEO adjusted his weight on Naomi's back and laughed with his friends. He titled the video, "When Grandma Forgets She's Not an Economy," and added the caption, "First class just got a new ottoman, #CEO things #savage." Within seconds of upload, the likes began pouring in. 3.2K, 6.8K, 12, 5K. Bro's got a footrest and no chill. Tell me she didn't pay for that seat for... Haters gonna say it's staged. Most comments laughed, some questioned, but many applauded. Naomi, of course, knew nothing of this. She simply kept knitting. The yarn, red as pomegranate seeds, looped into a tiny, perfect spiral. She smiled faintly, not because of anything around her, but because in her mind, she imagined the baby who would wear this cap, the 5th grandchild, due in 6 weeks, her daughter's firstborn. She remembered the smell of shea butter, the songs sung under mango trees, the lullabies hummed in Fante, the sound of pain she had known. But dignity, that was her inheritance. Another passenger leaned toward the young man filming. "You really think it's okay to post that?" The boy shrugged, not looking up. "It's already blowing up, and besides, it's just a joke. Nobody's hurt." "No," the woman said quietly. "Not even her?" He paused, just a second, then tapped the refresh button. 23.7K likes. Look, he muttered, more to himself than anyone. People love this stuff. It's just the internet. Back in the cabin, the mood was dissonant. The laughter had faded into murmurs. Some passengers chuckled nervously. Others looked away. A few still filmed. Most said nothing. That's what silence does in the face of casual cruelty. It wraps itself around complicity like a blanket. Ethan leaned back, smug as ever. His foot still rested gently on Naomi's back. His fingers toyed with the edge of his glass. "She's not even mad," he whispered to one of his friends. "It's like she's made of wood." The friend laughed, trying to hide his discomfort behind his drink. But Naomi's silence wasn't ignorance, nor was it fear. It was calculation. And someone was watching. Farther down the cabin, Janella Carey, the woman in black, slowly placed her book on the tray table. Her eyes never left Naomi. She'd been trained for this, for tension hidden beneath civility. She recognized the patterns: public shaming, systemic silence, microaggressions dressed in wealth. Janelle was many things: former cybersecurity analyst, linguist, covert operative, and now senior advisor to the most powerful financial entity in Africa. But in moments like these, she was something more primal: protector. She looked at Naomi's hands, the rhythm of the knitting, still steady. That was the signal. The old woman wasn't ready yet. So, neither was Janelle. But her pulse quickened. Beneath her blazer, strapped tightly to her back, was a biometric device no civilian eye could ever identify. And in her left sleeve, a microcom buzzed twice. A silent ping from Agent Collins. Confirmation, they were in position. Still, no one moved. Yet. On TikTok, the video hit 48.1K likes in 10 minutes, then 102K. It was now on the For You page globally. Influencers were stitching it, laughing, adding captions like "peak savage energy" and "when you're rich enough to own humans again," some ironic, others not. And then, something shifted. One comment rose to the top. "Y'all are laughing, but that's a real woman. That's someone's grandmother. Imagine if it were yours." Another, "She didn't even flinch. That's not funny, that's trauma." Then, "This feels wrong. Like, deeply wrong." The tide was turning. On board, Naomi dropped a stitch. Her hands paused. She looked down at the missing loop, then slowly picked it up with the needle. Her shoulders, still hunched from the weight of Ethan's sneaker, seemed heavier now, but only just. Ethan finally pulled his foot back. "Don't want to scuff the Yeezys," he muttered, brushing the sole. The air felt heavier. Even his friends weren't laughing anymore. At the rear of first class, Agent Doobie opened the Sky News app. A headline blinked. "Breaking. Viral video sparks outrage. Tech CEO accused of elder abuse mid-flight." Doob looked up. "Already circulating," he murmured. Agent Collins, beside him, nodded once. "The net's starting to eat itself," he replied. "One more trigger, and this goes nuclear." Naomi finished the first layer of the cap. The spiral was smooth, consistent. It would fit a newborn's crown perfectly. She inhaled, exhaled. Janelle tapped her pen once on the table, the tiniest motion, the signal. But Naomi didn't respond. She kept knitting, because the storm wasn't ready. Not yet. The humiliation had to ripen. The shame had to ferment. The world had to see. Because if it ended now, the lesson wouldn't sink deep enough. And Naomi Mensah had spent her life ensuring every lesson left a scar where it belonged. Back on the ground, a former journalist named Darnell Lewis shared the video on Twitter. But his caption was different. "She never asked for justice. She just kept knitting. But maybe she's not the one we should be watching." And with that, the clip took a darker turn. Someone slowed the footage down. They zoomed in, not on Ethan, but on the woman in black. The slight motion of her page turning, the cold intensity in her stare. the way her fingers didn't move when she read. "Who is she?" commenters began to ask. And somewhere deep in Ghana's capital, in a control room cloaked in shadows, a console beeped. A staffer looked up. "Chairwoman, the footage just hit 1.2 million views. Engagement is accelerating." A woman in traditional kente turned slowly to the screen. She smiled, not with pride, but with recognition. "It's time," she said. But Naomi hadn't moved yet, still knitting, still waiting, because the weight of justice must be felt before it falls, and when it does not whisper, it roars. The hum of the engines was the only thing steady now. Naomi continued knitting, her hands moving with quiet purpose, but her back bore the echo of Ethan's arrogance. Though his sneaker had been removed minutes ago, its weight lingered, not on her body, but on the moral fabric of the cabin, a fabric that was slowly unraveling. Janella Carey remained motionless. Her eyes had not moved since the moment Naomi resumed her knitting. In her right hand, a sleek hardback novel rested on her lap, The Psychology of Power. No one had paid her any mind until now. Her demeanor screamed background, efficient, polite, invisible. But Janelle had never been just background. Ethan stood now, laughing again, basking in the attention of his friends and the momentary virality he believed he'd achieved. He turned toward the aisle, arms slung across the headrest, bragging to his entourage about teaching class to classless people. It was in that instant, when his back turned and his guard dropped, that Janelle moved. No sudden gestures, no drama. She simply slipped a thin black rectangle from within the pages of her book. It looked like a bookmark, innocent. But it wasn't paper. It was carbon composite, embedded with biometric data points and 2 micro-haptic triggers. Her fingers tapped once, then twice. A screen illuminated on the inside of her book jacket, visible only from her angle. Silent, encrypted, blinking red. Access Level 7, Ubuntu Crisis Command. Status, on board. Operation code, Anansi. She typed 3 characters. TAR, the screen responded. Target verified. Ethan Blake, CEO. Vexen AI threat level. PR plus moral crisis recommended action. Immediate containment. No one around her noticed. Ethan's noise filled the space like perfume. Strong enough to distract, weak enough to evaporate soon. Janelle whispered something, almost inaudibly. Protocol Emberlight. Behind her seat, hidden in the upholstery, a transmitter buzzed to life. Elsewhere on the plane, 2 agents, Collins and Dubé, received the signal. Their microcomms pinged once in their ears, inaudible to everyone else. They didn't rise. Not yet. This wasn't their cue to act. It was Janelle's. She reached into her inner coat pocket and retrieved a pair of matte black glasses. At a glance, they looked like reading lenses. But they were Ubuntu's proprietary design, AR embedded, facial recognition enabled, and hardwired to a secure AI interface known only to the top 4 members of the organization. She placed them gently on her nose and blinked twice. Target lock acquired. Ethan Blake. Voice print match, 98.7% confidence. Emotional state, euphoric, reckless, narcissistic. Typical, she muttered. But this wasn't about ego or humiliation. This was about precedent. About ensuring that men like Ethan never felt safe weaponizing power in public spaces again. 10 years earlier, Janelle had been in Aleppo, coordinating a refugee extraction during a chemical raid. 2 years after that, she broke a darknet ring trafficking biometric data through luxury resorts in Macau. In both instances, she worked in the shadows. But in those moments, she had never been angrier than she was now, watching an old woman being reduced to a punchline at 39,000 feet. And Janelle never acted on anger, but she always acted on pattern recognition, the arrogance, the laughter, the silence of bystanders, the phones recording, not intervening. This was the pattern that led to systems breaking down. She tapped the device again, The screen now showed, "Authorization granted. Chairwoman NM. Status, engage." Suddenly, Ethan's voice faltered mid-sentence. One of his friends was looking past him, eyes widening. Ethan turned and saw Janelle standing. Her book was closed. Her glasses were still on. She said nothing, but her posture had shifted. Gone was the quiet, deferential assistant aura. In its place stood someone who belonged to a different world. Not of money, not of fame, but of authority built in shadows, enforced in silence. Ethan's smirk flickered. "Can I help you?" he asked, half laughing. Janelle took one step forward. "You've helped enough," she replied evenly. He blinked. "Sorry, do I know you?" "No," she said, "but I know everything I need to know about you." Across the cabin, the two agents stood, one by one. Agent Collins adjusted his sleeve. Agent Doob pressed a button on his watch. Seat 1A and 1F, both empty moments ago, lit up blue under the cabin's ambient lights. Hidden command hubs disguised as passenger seats. Janelle turned back to Naomi, who had finally looked up. Their eyes met. Naomi gave a slight nod, a signal. No words needed. On the encrypted network running beneath the aircraft's internal systems, a new command registered. Phase 1 complete. Initiating Phase 2, live systemic response. From this moment forward, Ethan Blake's digital footprint would begin unraveling, quietly, irreversibly. Stock alerts, board pings, notifications of sudden sell-offs, employee resignations queued from previously scheduled exit interviews, activated, and still, on the plane. Nothing seemed to happen. Not yet. Janelle turned back to Ethan, took one final step closer, and said, "You've mistaken silence for weakness. That's a common error in men like you." He laughed again, nervously. "Is this a prank? Like, are you recording this or something?" "No," she said, slipping the device back into her book. "But the world is." She turned and walked back to her seat. The moment passed. For now. But the clock had started ticking. And Ethan Blake was about to learn that some fights don't happen on social media. They happen in silence. And Lan can roar. The cabin returned to a fragile calm. Ethan, now somewhat unsettled by Janelle's quiet confrontation, scoffed and muttered something under his breath as she retook her seat. He tried to laugh it off, but it came out forced, shallow, hollow. "Someone thinks she's MI6, he chuckled, nudging his friend. "Or maybe she watches too much Netflix." His entourage snorted weakly, their previous energy drained by the shift in the air. Something was off, and they all felt it, but none could name it. Naomi resumed her knitting. Loop, pull, slide. The soft clack of the needles returned like a ticking metronome in a silent orchestra. To anyone observing, she seemed unfazed, but her eyes no longer tracked the yarn. They were focused inward, timing, calculating. In seat 1A, a man with a Canon DSLR slung around his neck stretched and stood up. He had spent most of the flight pretending to take pictures out the window, flipping through a travel magazine, and making idle conversation with the crew about photography and wildlife in Namibia. Now, he adjusted his jacket. Across the aisle, in seat 1F, a middle-aged man with a Bluetooth headset and a Wall Street Journal tucked under his arm closed his laptop with a soft snap. He stood and straightened his tie with clinical precision. Every movement was practiced, deliberate, rehearsed. To most, they were simply another tourist and another business traveler. They weren't. They were Agent Collins and Agent Doob, and the mission had just entered Phase 2. Ethan leaned over his seat, pulling out his phone, planning to refresh his notifications. His TikTok post had already gone viral. It was all over the internet. He assumed. He wanted to read the comments aloud, maybe add a smug little follow-up clip. Something like, "When privilege meets peasantry." But before his thumb could unlock the screen, Collins struck. In one fluid motion, the agent stepped into the aisle, gripped Ethan's right wrist, and twisted it backward with precision. Not enough to break, but more than enough to incapacitate. Ethan screamed, a high, surprised yelp, more disbelief than pain. His phone slipped from his grasp and clattered to the floor. The sound it made echoed like a gunshot through the cabin. Gasps erupted, seatbelts unclicked, heads turned. "What the hell?" someone shouted. Ethan's friends jumped up, but before they could move, Doob appeared behind them, blocking the aisle like a monolith in a tailored blazer. He raised one hand, palm flat, commanding silence without saying a word. "Sit," he said calmly. The authority in that voice, measured, absolute, cut through the confusion. The young man who had filmed the viral video tried to stand, but Dubé turned to him with a stare so sharp the boy instantly dropped back into his seat, eyes wide, lips sealed. Collins pushed Ethan gently but firmly back into his chair, holding his wrist in a locking grip behind his back. The CEO twisted and writhed. "Do you know who I am?" Ethan hissed, face red, veins pulsing at his temples. "Yes," Collins replied flatly. "That's precisely why you're being restrained." From her seat, Janelle looked up, removed her glasses, and gave the faintest nod of approval. Across the aisle, Naomi didn't lift her head, but her hands paused. One heartbeat, then resumed knitting. Loop, pull, slide. Chaos teetered on the edge of eruption. Passengers were whispering, recording, asking questions. A few shouted for the crew. One woman in pearls clutched her chest like this was a hijacking. But the crew, oddly, did not intervene, because they'd been briefed. Quietly, hours before takeoff. This flight had been tagged with a Level 3 watch order by an unnamed sovereign financial entity. Certain protocols had been activated, and when the agents moved, the staff knew to stand down. Behind the scenes, cabin Wi-Fi was now restricted. Social media uploads were halted. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all returned error messages. No one could post, no one could warn. The digital world had gone dark by design. Ethan struggled harder. "You can't do this. I'll have your jobs. I'll sue. You hear me?" Collins applied slight pressure to a nerve cluster near Ethan's shoulder blade. The CEO froze, gasping, his entire body locking in place. "That's called a brachial stun," Collins said evenly. "It's non-lethal, but very persuasive." Doob, meanwhile, scanned the cabin. His eyes didn't miss a single twitch. In the rear of first class, two teenage girls stared with open mouths, phones in hand. He walked over, crouched gently between them, and held out his hand. "No confiscation," he said, "but I do need to wipe what you've recorded." They hesitated. He added, "We're protecting you, not him. Trust me." The older girl nodded, handed over the phone. The younger followed. Doob placed a small device on top of each phone for 5 seconds, then returned them. "Thank you," he said. "You did the right thing." Back in the aisle, Collins lifted Ethan slightly from his seat and guided him to the emergency jump seat near the galley. "Sit," he said. "I demand—" Ethan began. "You demand nothing," Collins interrupted. "You've already taken too much." The cabin had descended into murmuring confusion. But one thing was clear. The power dynamic had shifted, not just physically, but emotionally, atmospherically. Ethan, once king of the sky, now sat alone, bent, sweating, shaken. And Naomi? She gently clipped the yarn from the spool, folded the small red cap in her lap, and placed it inside a silk pouch. Then, for the first time since boarding, she looked up and made eye contact with Ethan. She said nothing, but the look in her eyes, it wasn't vengeance. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was justice, quiet, exact, undeniable. And that, more than any grip or gadget, was the first real blow. Silence clung to the cabin like fog. Ethan sat stiffly on the fold-down seat near the galley, his wrist still tender from the nerve hold. His $1,000 suit clung to his body like damp paper. Sweat glistened along his hairline. The camera-ready CEO now looked more like a schoolboy caught cheating on an exam. He kept whispering to himself, over and over, as if repeating the words would restore control. "I'm the CEO. I'm the fucking CEO." Naomi stood slowly from her seat. The red baby cap had been carefully folded and returned to her pouch. The knitting needles were stowed. Her shawl, blue and gold, worn with quiet pride, fluttered as she adjusted it across her shoulders. There was no rush in her movement, no spectacle. She walked to the center of the aisle, not looking at Ethan, not looking at the cameras. Her presence alone demanded silence, and silence obeyed. Janelle stood too, glasses off, posture straight, hands by her sides. She didn't need to speak, she didn't need to move. Her job was done. The agents remained alert, but stationary. The room, for the first time in the last half hour, was still. Then Naomi reached into the lining of her shawl and pulled out a small, black leather case. She clicked it open with a soft snap. Inside sat a thin platinum card. But this wasn't a credit card or airline pass. It was an ID badge. Etched into it were two words in bold serif: Chairwoman, Ubuntu Global Capital. The air pressure in the cabin seemed to change. Several passengers gasped audibly. A man near the front let out a stunned, "Oh my God," under his breath. Ethan's eyes went wide. "That's not real. That's not real. That's a fake ID. Anyone can print that." Naomi looked at him for the first time. "Your ignorance continues to be your loudest credential." She turned slightly, and with a subtle flick of her wrist, passed the badge to Janelle. The advisor raised her smartwatch and scanned the embedded chip. A blue holographic seal flickered above the device. Verified. At that same moment, onboard satellite sync resumed briefly, just long enough for a single line of code to execute. All over the internet, the TikTok clip vanished. Every repost, every stitch, every duet, gone. Search results for first-class Footrest CEO, now redirected to a single image. Naomi Mensah, in traditional kente, seated beside global economic leaders at the 2022 Ubuntu Ethics Summit. The caption read, "Respect is not optional." On Ethan's phone, recovered from the floor by Agent Collins, notifications exploded. Hundreds of pings, then blackout. He grabbed for the device. Collins let him take it. His fingers fumbled the unlock code. The screen lit up, then turned black. A red icon appeared. Account disabled. Security violation detected. All his social apps wiped. Banking access suspended. Emails bounced. Ethan blinked, mouth opening and closing. His empire wasn't just collapsing, it was vanishing. What did you do?" he sputtered. Naomi took one slow step toward him. "I didn't do anything," she said. "You did." He stood suddenly, chest heaving. "I'm the CEO of Vexen AI. You can't touch me." Janelle spoke now, crisp and calm. "Incorrect. As of 4 minutes ago, Vexen's controlling stake was absorbed through open market acquisition. Legal, strategic, irrevocable." Ethan's mouth hung open. No, that's not how this works. You can't. Stock doesn't just change hands like magic." Janelle tapped her device. "Over 51% of voting shares now belong to Ubuntu Global Capital, courtesy of our Tokyo, London, and New York desks executing synchronized trades. Your own COO sold his shares this morning, citing philosophical differences." A beat of silence. Then Naomi added, "And your board authorized a motion, filed 1 hour ago, to appoint me as interim CEO." Ethan laughed, a hollow, desperate bark. "This is a joke. I'll call the board. I'll reverse it." Naomi simply raised her wrist. A comm line activated. A crisp male voice responded. "Chairwoman Mensah, this is Zurich Command. Transfer complete. You now hold executive authority across all North American Vexen divisions." Naomi ended the call. The entire cabin was still. Passengers stared, stunned. Even those who didn't understand finance knew what they'd just witnessed was not merely a shift in power. It was a toppling, a dethroning, and it had happened mid-air. Naomi looked Ethan dead in the eye. "You claimed I didn't belong in first class, that I was less than furniture. You wanted a footrest." She stepped forward. "Now you're standing on the last inch of your legacy, and it's about to collapse beneath you." He stumbled back. "You're not God. You can't just—" "I don't need to be God," she said. "I just need to remind men like you that your title means nothing when your character is bankrupt." Ethan tried to retort, but his throat tightened. Naomi turned to Agent Collins. "Escort Mr. Blake to the rear cabin. He no longer has authority here." Collins nodded. "With pleasure." As Ethan was gently but firmly turned around, he caught a glimpse of the screen on Janelle's tablet. It showed his own face. Underneath it, status removed. The last thing he saw before being led away was Naomi retaking her seat. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply reached back into her pouch and resumed knitting. Naomi sat quietly, her shawl once again wrapped gracefully across her shoulders, the rhythm of her knitting uninterrupted. But behind those calm eyes, a storm had already been released. Ethan had been escorted to the rear cabin like a dethroned monarch exiled from his own kingdom. His protests had grown weaker with each step, his voice drowned out by the deafening silence of justice already in motion. Naomi turned her gaze slightly toward Janelle. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward. She simply said 2 words. "Bado." Janelle blinked once, then tapped her tablet. The screen shifted instantly, its interface morphing into a secure command portal. Symbols encrypted in a hybrid cipher, a mixture of Akan glyphs and numeric rotational protocols, unlocked a network that spanned continents. Her fingers moved with precision. This wasn't just communication. This was command. Level 9 access, confirmed. Chairwoman Naomi Mensah, authorization token, live. Across the world, silent instructions sparked into motion. Tokyo, 0107 AM JST. In a nondescript building in the Minato district, the trading floor of Ubuntu Global's East Asia branch was dimly lit. The staff had been pre-alerted for Operation Tempest, a code that meant stand by for an unannounced high-velocity acquisition. The head trader, Keiji Nomura, received the ping. A single blinking word appeared on his screen. Execute. He didn't hesitate. Pull Vexen. His team, over 20 elite financial analysts and algorithmic traders, sprang into motion. Terminals lit up. Proprietary trading bots activated with sub-millisecond latency, funneling billions into a web of shell buyers, trust intermediaries, and private equity fronts. Within 60 seconds, 9.3% of Vexen's publicly traded stock was acquired. London, 0507 p.m. GMT. In Canary Wharf, Ubuntu Europe was already in after-hours mode, but that didn't matter. The command system was never offline. "Confirmation from Cape Town," the night supervisor said. "Naomi just gave the go." A Nigerian quant analyst named Seyi nodded. "Let's rattle the LSE." They activated the cross-pool purchase strategy. Vexen's European float began to vanish, quietly, another 6.2% gone. New York, 12:07 p.m. East on Wall Street, the markets were humming as usual, until they weren't. Ubuntu's North American branch had disguised itself through 20 separate hedge fund proxies, each with different names, CEOs, and compliance teams. No one knew they were all fingers of the same hand. "Chairwoman's command confirmed," said Maya Chen, head of execution. "Go dark, sweep, do not trigger price alerts." The AI-assisted trading systems executed 5,004 microtransactions per second, all designed to mimic retail investor behavior. Vexen stock began to move, but not enough to trigger alarms. Yet, another 10.7% gone. Inside the plane, At 39,000 feet, Janelle watched her tablet with unwavering focus. Live graphs updated every 3 seconds. A red halo surrounded Vexen's global footprint. Each region's activity blinked like war zones in a strategy simulation. 34% and rising, she murmured. Naomi didn't look up. Their defenses? Janelle swiped left. No coordinated response. The board is fragmented. Their interim general counsel resigned yesterday. Internal email leak about harassment. Your timing was flawless. Naomi clicked her needles together softly. It wasn't timing. It was inevitability. Zurich, 06:07 p.m. CET. The final piece, Ubuntu's Swiss safehold, a fortress of capital run under complete anonymity, activated their endgame. A silent call to Vexen's largest institutional investor, Meriton Asset Group, was placed. A female voice answered. You have our number, she said, which means you already know our price. We're offering 3% over closing value. Cash, no conditions, replied the Ubuntu agent. Done. And just like that, another 15.5% was gone. Cumulative holding, 66.2%, the threshold had been shattered. Control wasn't just theoretical now. It was legal, binding, absolute. Back on the plane, Naomi finally looked up from her knitting. Status? Janelle replied. Control achieved. Formal ownership papers will be filed the moment we land. Naomi nodded once. And Ethan? Still breathing, still unaware of how fast his empire fell. Naomi's gaze drifted to the window. Below them, the Atlantic shimmered like molten glass. People like him always think it takes years to dismantle a legacy, she said. But legacies built on arrogance? They crumble in minutes. Meanwhile, back in the rear cabin, Ethan sat pale-faced. His phone, now just a shiny, locked rectangle, rested in his palm. No apps responded. No messages came through. Then, as if on cue, the screen vibrated once. A notification popped up. New account activity detected. Admin privileges transferred. He stared. Then another buzz. You have been removed from Vexen's executive Slack workspace. Followed by scheduled calendar access revoked. And the final nail. Corporate email permanently disabled. Ethan dropped the phone. It landed with a soft thud against the carpeted floor. He looked around at the flight attendants, at the other passengers. No one looked back. He wasn't a spectacle anymore. He was irrelevant. He tried to stand, but Collins appeared again, calm as ever. Where are you going? Ethan's voice cracked. I need to talk to someone. Collins raised an eyebrow. Who? He didn't have an answer, because there was no one left. Back in the front cabin, Naomi returned her knitting to the pouch again. Janelle handed her a soft cloth. Naomi unfolded it to reveal an antique gold pin, the Ubuntu Global insignia embedded with a black opal. She placed it over her heart and fastened it. The room was still. Passengers didn't know what exactly had happened, but they felt it. The shift, the weight, the message. Naomi didn't need to explain it. The world would feel it soon enough. Ethan Blake sat frozen, staring at the darkened screen of his phone like it might come back to life if he begged hard enough. His fingers trembled. His jaw clenched and unclenched with no words escaping. The cabin was cool, but sweat traced slow lines down his temples. Agent Collins stood nearby, arms folded. Not aggressive, just present. But his presence was a quiet reminder. Ethan was no longer in control, not of the flight, not of his image, and now, not even of his company. Then the final message came. Not a buzz, not a ping, just a cold blue glow and a single line of text. 52.3% of Vexen AI's outstanding shares have been transferred to Ubuntu Global Capital. There was no need for a second message. Ethan's face paled visibly, the blood draining as though the cabin had suddenly lost pressure. No, that's impossible, he whispered, shaking his head. That would trigger a full change of control clause. That would mean... He stopped mid-sentence because he knew exactly what it meant. The back of his knees buckled. He gripped the armrest, breathing in shallow gasps. The words were there. He just couldn't form them. One of his friends, seated a few rows back, looked at him with wide, helpless eyes. Another one turned away, pretending to scroll his now useless Instagram feed. Ethan finally stood. He stumbled a bit, clutching the seatbacks as he made his way forward, toward the first-class cabin. Collins didn't stop him. Naomi was seated near the front, back straight, hands resting on her lap. The baby cap had returned, one small stitch being added slowly, rhythmically. Beside her, Janelle watched Ethan approach with the look of a lioness guarding her den. Not aggressive, but alert. Coiled. Ethan stopped 3 feet in front of Naomi, breathing heavily. "Chairwoman Mensah," he said, voice cracked and soft. "Please." Naomi didn't look up. "I know what I did. I know I went too far. But this is everything I've built. My life's work." She continued knitting. I can transfer my voting shares. Step aside. You can run the board, the governance. Just don't dissolve the company. Nothing. I'll issue a public apology. Take full accountability. Make a donation, even to Ubuntu, to whatever cause you support. I swear, I'll do it with sincerity. Her hands didn't pause. I'll resign from everything. Just don't burn it all down. Please. Naomi added one final stitch and gently tied off the yarn. Then she folded the cap again, placing it delicately into the silk pouch. Only then did she lift her eyes to Ethan. What he saw in them wasn't rage. It was sorrow, and that hit harder. "You're not here because of what you did to me," she said quietly. "You're here because of what you represent." Ethan swallowed. I don't understand." Naomi stood. "For decades, men like you have believed power protects you from consequences. That money buys silence, that charm erases harm, and for decades, the world played along." She took a step forward. "You mocked a grandmother in front of strangers. You placed your foot on my back. You laughed as if it meant nothing. And maybe, to you, it did mean nothing." She glanced toward the rear cabin, where murmurs were growing louder. But to everyone watching, online, in here, everywhere, it meant something. It reminded them of every time they were dismissed, disrespected, dehumanized. Ethan's mouth quivered. "It was a joke." "No," she cut him off. "It was a choice, and choices have prices." He collapsed into the nearest seat, hands cradling his face. "I didn't mean for this." Janelle finally spoke. "Intent is irrelevant when the damage is real." Back in the cabin, word was spreading like wildfire. Whispers gave way to full conversations. Passengers were scrolling their devices in disbelief as news alerts began pushing through the limited onboard data channel. Vexen AI experiences hostile takeover mid-flight. As CEO Ethan Blake ousted after viral video controversy. Ubuntu Global Capital assumes control. Naomi Mensah behind rapid acquisition. One woman covered her mouth. A man muttered, "I saw that clip this morning. I thought it was fake." And yet here it was, unfolding live, 30,000 feet above the Atlantic. Near the galley, a flight attendant softly approached Naomi. "Madam Chairwoman," she said, voice trembling slightly. "On behalf of the crew, we're honored." Naomi smiled gently. "You've nothing to apologize for. You served with grace. That's all anyone can ask." Janelle tapped her tablet again. The screen now displayed internal Slack messages from Vexen employees. "Can someone explain what's happening? Our email systems are down. Are we being hacked? CEO just got removed? Mid-flight? Is this for real?" And then, honestly, good riddance. About time. Ethan looked up again. "They'll hate you for this. The media, the markets. You'll be called ruthless, cold." Naomi replied, "I've been called worse for doing far less." He leaned forward, desperation now raw. "Just give me something. A path to redemption. A role. Anything. She paused. Then, very softly, redemption requires remorse, not negotiation. Janelle took a single step forward, but Naomi raised her hand slightly. She looked at Ethan one last time. I didn't burn your empire, Mr. Blake. I simply stopped shielding it from the truth. And with that, she turned back to her seat, reclaimed her knitting, and pulled the yarn through her fingers with care. In the cabin, someone began to clap, then another. Then the whole front section of first class was on its feet, not cheering but acknowledging. It wasn't celebration. It was release. Catharsis. Recognition. Naomi didn't look up. She didn't need the applause. She had never needed permission to be powerful. She had only waited for the right moment to remind the world. The applause gradually faded, like the final notes of a symphony that had shaken every heart in the room. Naomi remained seated, knitting needles resting on her lap, her eyes unfocused, not lost, but deep within. Janelle stood beside her, eyes still scanning, ever watchful, as if the victory required as much vigilance as the battle. Ethan, now slumped in a seat across the aisle, looked nothing like the man who had strutted through the cabin less than an hour ago. His hair was tousled, lips dry, voice nearly gone. But what haunted him most wasn't the lost company. It was her. Naomi Mensah. She had become larger than life in his eyes, not just powerful, but precise. Not just rich, but righteous. And there was something in the way she'd looked at him that didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like recognition, like she'd seen him before, somewhere, somehow. Janelle tapped her tablet again, pulling up a different screen this time. Not financial data, not company ownership charts. This was a document. Older, grainy. A scanned intake form from a hospital in Accra, Ghana. The header read, St. Joseph Medical Center, Pediatric Cardiology Division. Date, August 13th, 2010. Patient, Charles Blake. Condition, severe congenital heart defect. Emergency transplant required. Beneath that, a single line was circled in red. Anonymous donor. Covered full surgical cost plus post-op care. Janelle turned to Naomi. Do you want me to say it? She asked gently. Naomi kept her eyes on the knitting. He deserves to know. Janelle turned toward Ethan, voice calm but steady. 15 years ago, your father was in critical condition in Accra. He would have died within days. Ethan looked up, confused, suspicious. How do you... Janelle continued. There was no insurance. No government program would cover the cross-border transfer. No hospital would move him without payment in full. I know, Ethan said bitterly. My dad always told that story, how a mystery donor came through at the last second. Janelle nodded. Yes, and that donor was her. She gestured toward Naomi. Ethan blinked. What? Naomi finally looked at him, her eyes calm, unshaking. Your father worked at an airport tarmac in Ghana. He once helped me get a visa processed when the embassy had closed. Stayed past midnight just to make sure my documents went through. He didn't know who I was. He just said, "You look like someone who's needed somewhere." She paused. I never forgot that. Ethan stared at her like the air had been pulled from his lungs. But that doesn't make sense, he said, struggling. He died when I was 17, and the donor was anonymous. There were no names. Anonymous, Naomi said. Doesn't mean unknowing. She turned back to her yarn. I chose not to tell him because I didn't want gratitude. I wanted him to raise you with the same kindness he gave me. I hoped it would pass on. Ethan's face twisted. Anger, shame, disbelief. I didn't know. Naomi met his gaze once more. Now you do. The cabin rippled. Gasps turned to murmurs. Conversations bloomed spontaneously. She saved his father's life? All this, and she was his family's benefactor? Twist of the century. Somewhere near the front, a young woman, maybe mid-30s, began crying silently. That's what mercy looks like, she whispered to no one in particular. That's what it should be. Even the crew seemed momentarily paralyzed. A flight attendant near the beverage cart clutched the handle like she needed grounding. A businessman in seat 2A lowered his phone. "I was ready to cancel her for being too aggressive," he said to the man beside him. "But now, I don't even know what to think." "That's the point," came the reply. Ethan was shaking his head. "You saved my father's life, and I stepped on your back." Naomi didn't answer. "I mocked your culture, your clothes. I laughed at you." Still nothing. "I treated you like a thing." Naomi nodded once, slowly. "That's correct." Ethan's voice cracked. "Why didn't you say something before? Why wait until now?" Naomi inhaled, long and full. "Because justice without revelation is empty, and revelation without humility is wasted." She folded the baby cap once more, tying it with a ribbon. "Sometimes," she continued, "the most powerful moment is when the villain discovers he's been protected by the very person he tried to destroy." The silence that followed was heavy, but not oppressive. It was contemplative, transformative, and in that moment, every person on board, regardless of status or seat, felt something shift. The economy of power had been rewritten, the algorithm of dominance reversed. Even Janelle, ever stoic, allowed her arms to fall to her sides, the tightness in her posture releasing slightly. She had seen war, she had seen collapse, but she had never seen redemption begin like this. Janelle turned to Naomi again. "Should I activate the final lockout sequence?" Naomi hesitated, looked back at Ethan, saw the broken boy behind the arrogant man. "No," she said quietly. "Let it sit." Janelle raised an eyebrow. "He needs to feel the weight," Naomi said. "And weight only teaches when it lingers." In the rear of the plane, Ethan sat back down, head in hands. No restraints, no orders, no need. He wasn't going anywhere, and everyone knew it. Ethan's face was a study in collapse. The usually pristine lines of his jaw now hung slack, lips trembling as if unsure how to speak without lying. His shoulders drooped, not from fatigue, but from the unbearable gravity of being seen, truly seen, for the first time. No wealth to hide behind, no title to shield him. He sat with hands folded in his lap, head bowed, the picture of disgrace. And yet, he rose, slowly, like a man climbing his own gallows. He made his way once again to Naomi's seat. She didn't look up this time. Her knitting rested in her lap. Her fingers, now still, pressed lightly against the soft red wool. It was as if she'd already sewn shut every word she had for him. "Madam Mensah." Ethan's voice was hoarse, ragged. "Please, listen." She didn't move. He knelt, right there in the aisle, knees pressing into the plush carpeting like a penitent before a queen. "I didn't know," he whispered. "About my father, about you, about what you'd done." Still, no reaction. "I thought power made people untouchable. I thought money made me right." Finally, Naomi looked at him. Her gaze wasn't sharp. It wasn't even cold. It was weary. "I was wrong," he choked. "I've been wrong for a long time." A long silence followed. The entire cabin watched, dozens of eyes, some sympathetic, some skeptical, most simply stunned that this man who had once mocked an old woman as furniture now knelt before her like a sinner seeking salvation. "I know I can't undo what I did," Ethan continued, "but I'm still young. I can learn, change, use this for something better, if you'll let me." Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. "And if I don't?" Ethan hesitated. "Then I'll still try, but it'll be a lot harder. Without your forgiveness, I'll always be the man who stepped on a woman who saved his father's life." Naomi sat back. Her voice, when it came, was almost too soft to hear. "Kao chan saingui de kai tum." Ethan looked up. "What?" "You chose me," she said slowly, "as your object, your target, the one to mock. You could have picked anyone, but you picked me." He opened his mouth to respond, but she held up one finger. I've survived civil war, economic collapse, 3 miscarriages, and a world that told me at every step that I was too old, too female, too African to matter. She leaned forward. And I still built an empire. Ethan looked away, shame coloring his cheeks. And you, she added, with all your degrees, your funding, your followers, collapsed in less than an hour. He flinched like she'd struck him. Naomi tilted her head. Tell me, Ethan, was it worth it? The laugh? The 5 seconds of feeling bigger than someone else? He didn't answer. She turned back to her knitting. Ethan reached slowly into his coat. Agent Collins took a step forward, but Naomi raised her hand. Ethan's hand emerged, holding a small metal card. A black Amex Centurion, the kind of card that whispered wealth in places where shouting wasn't allowed. He held it out, palm up. I'll donate, he said. Whatever amount. Just say the word. Naomi didn't even glance at it. He kept his hand out. 50 million, he said. For Ubuntu. For your causes. Hell, make it 100. This isn't about buying you off, it's... She stood up, slowly, gracefully, and without a word, turned her back on him. She didn't take the card, didn't acknowledge the offer, didn't even look back. She walked back to her seat, lowered herself with care, and resumed knitting like nothing had happened. Ethan remained on his knees, card still in hand, eyes wide. I'm trying, he yelled now, voice cracking. God damn it, I'm trying! Several passengers turned away. The spectacle had turned. No longer humbling. Now, pathetic. Back near the rear, one of Ethan's friends whispered, He really thought a donation would fix this? The other shook his head. That man doesn't even know what he's apologizing for. He's just panicking. In the cockpit, word had already spread. The pilot had received a silent ping from the Ubuntu communications desk. Secure escort upon landing was the only message. No questions asked. Back in seat 3C, Naomi pulled the yarn tighter. Janelle leaned in. You were harsher than I expected. Naomi didn't look up. I wasn't harsh. I was final. Janelle nodded slowly. You think he'll recover? No, Naomi replied. But that doesn't mean he won't change. Janelle paused, surprised. You still believe that? Naomi smiled faintly. Only because I've seen worse men become better. She looked down at her knitting, then at her hands. And I've seen better men become worse. Ethan finally rose to his feet. The card fell from his hand to the floor with a quiet clink. He didn't pick it up. He returned to the back, walking past rows of passengers who now saw him not as powerful, but pitiful. He sat again in the corner of the cabin and stared out the window. There was nothing but blue sky, but he had never felt so small. At 38,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, silence held the cabin in reverent suspension. The confrontation had ended. Ethan had retreated. Naomi had turned her back not in rage, but in something far more damning: disinterest. But justice, Naomi knew, couldn't stop at humiliation. Justice that only struck individuals was catharsis. What the world needed now was reckoning. She leaned slightly toward Janelle, her voice barely above the hum of the engines. Phase 3, she said. Initiate. Janelle didn't flinch. Her fingers danced across the tablet, unlocking a different command module. The interface changed. Gone were the market analytics, the equity flows. This was internal. Vexen Systems Access, Admin Override. Ride. Status, Chairwoman Control. Naomi Mensah. Across continents, the walls began to crumble. In San Francisco, Vexen AI's headquarters. A systems engineer returned from lunch and noticed that his admin credentials had been revoked. Hey, I can't push the latest patch, he said aloud. 3 desks over, someone tried to log into Slack. Error, channel archived. Wait, what's happening? In the marketing department, a full team watched in real time as their ad server dashboard blinked off. The screen read, Content in violation of updated ethics protocol. Account terminated. One of them gasped. They just wiped our consumer AI assistant. Every instance gone. On the other side of the floor, a manager received an email that read, Subject, Board Dismissal. From Ubuntu Global Compliance. To all Vexen directors. Effective immediately, all members of Vexen's Board of Directors have been relieved of their duties. This action has been taken under emergency ethics provisions triggered by viral incident Nanstad AV 21477. You are advised to vacate your offices pending legal review. Back in the sky, Naomi watched the ripple begin. You want to teach a system? She murmured to herself. Start with the mirror. Janelle looked over. Boardroom purge complete. All directors locked out. Naomi gave the faintest nod. And the AI units? Janelle tapped twice. Global shutdown in progress. All Vexen consumer-facing AI is now offline. From kitchen assistants to fitness trackers, from child language bots to interactive virtual tutors, devices blinked out worldwide. Screens went black. Voices once friendly and familiar stuttered and died. One final message appeared across all active devices. This application has been removed due to systemic ethical violations. Thank you for your trust. We will earn it back. In London, a CEO of a tech competitor stared at his phone, stunned. He had just received a clip, sent by a friend in New York, of Ethan Blake on a plane, pinned down, face buried in the aisle carpet, screaming like a child. The video paused, then replayed, then again. He turned to his assistant. Is that real? His assistant nodded, pale. And it's worse. Ubuntu's pulled all Vexen products off every major platform. Apple, Google, Amazon, they've all complied. He blinked. Jesus. Another notification arrived. Ubuntu Global requests joint charter on AI ethics oversight. Non-participants will be blacklisted from international partnerships. The CEO sat back in his chair, exhaled deeply. It's a new world, he said. At a coffee shop in Chicago, a young girl tapped her Vexen homework tutor. Nothing happened. She turned to her mother. It's gone. Her mother glanced at her phone. Everything's gone. The child frowned. Why? The mother looked at the screen. She didn't know the full story. She hadn't seen the footage, but she saw the words. Systemic ethical violation. She didn't need more explanation. Because, she said gently, some people thought they could treat others like less than human. The girl thought for a moment. Did they say sorry? The mother stared. I don't think they did. In the cabin, Naomi sat calmly, eyes closed now. It wasn't exhaustion. It was clarity. She had waited decades for a moment like this, not for revenge, but for the kind of impact that restructures foundations. Not just knocking down walls, but changing the architecture. Impact status? She asked without opening her eyes. Janelle responded. 73 million devices disconnected. 49 countries issuing statements of support. Global financial press calling it the AI reckoning. Naomi opened her eyes. What about the tech world? Janelle's smile was small. They're scared. In the rear cabin, Ethan received a final email. Notice of permanent suspension from all public technology consortia. Effective immediately, due to breach of global ethics codes. The subject line was worse. Vexen, dismantled. His fingers hovered above the screen, but he didn't tap. There was nothing to do, nothing to say. He watched as the message faded. Even his phone seemed tired of him. Somewhere over the Atlantic, a baby cried. A steward brought Naomi tea. She accepted it with a small smile, cradled the cup like it held the weight of something more than heat. Janelle looked at her. It's done. Naomi nodded once. Not yet, she said softly. Now, we build something better. The engines hummed steadily as the aircraft continued its journey over the Atlantic, now just hours from its destination. But inside the cabin, something had shifted, not just in tone or atmosphere, but in the very moral architecture of the space. Naomi sat quietly, sipping her tea. Every movement was slow, intentional. She didn't need to speak. The work had already been done. The justice had already been served. But something still remained, a future to anchor, a legacy to frame. She handed the empty cup to a flight attendant with a nod of gratitude, then turned to Janelle. "It's time," Naomi said softly. Janelle tilted her head. "You want to release the statement now?" Naomi nodded. "Let the world know what comes after the reckoning." Janelle activated her tablet once again, this time opening a secure press interface. A pre-drafted statement sat in queue, its title simple, its message far-reaching. She looked to Naomi for the final confirmation. Naomi reviewed it one last time, then pressed her thumb against the screen. Approved. Within moments, the notification hit every major international newswire. Breaking. Naomi Mensah, chairwoman of Ubuntu Global, announces the launch of Ubuntu Ethics Trust, a new global initiative to combat discrimination in tech, finance, and public institutions. "This isn't about vengeance," the statement reads. "This is about accountability, about rewriting the DNA of leadership to honor dignity over dominance." The trust, seeded with $2.2 billion in initial funding, will oversee ethical audits, provide equity training, and investigate institutions with histories of discrimination or abuse of power. It will be governed by a board composed of 60% women of color from over 20 nations. It took 14 minutes for the world to respond. In Geneva, an ethics professor live-streamed her stunned reaction. "We've just witnessed a new Geneva Convention, not for war, but for power." In Lagos, a market vendor wiped tears from her cheeks as she watched Naomi's clip on a battered phone. She reminds us we're allowed to fight, even gently. In a conference room in Washington, D.C., an entire board meeting paused as the headline flashed across the screen. One executive, eyes wide, whispered, "If we're not on board with this by Monday, we're finished." Meanwhile, on the plane, Janelle turned to Naomi again. "You've shaken the system," she said. Naomi smiled faintly. "Not enough to break it, just enough to force it to look in the mirror." She stood slowly, using the armrest for support, not because she was weak, but because she was dignified in every movement. Janelle offered her hand, but Naomi waved it off. "Walk with me," she said instead. Janelle fell into step beside her. They began walking the length of the first-class cabin. The aisle, once occupied by Ethan's ego and laughter, now belonged to something else entirely. Reverence. Passengers shifted in their seats, not sure if they should speak or stay silent. Then one man stood. Then another. Then a woman near the window, hand over her heart, and then, without cue, without coordination, the entire first-class cabin stood as Naomi passed. Not applauding, not clapping. They bowed their heads, a gesture more ancient, more universal than applause, one of deference, of acknowledgement, of understanding. Naomi did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply met each gaze with calm gratitude, offering a soft nod in return. One passenger, an elderly white woman in pearls, reached out and touched Naomi's hand gently. "Thank you," she whispered, "for making me remember who I wanted to be." Naomi squeezed her hand lightly. A few rows back, a teenage boy who had been filming earlier lowered his phone and whispered to his father, "She's like a real-life superhero." His father replied, voice tight with emotion, "No, she's what heroes grow up to be." At the end of the aisle, Naomi paused. She turned toward the rear cabin, where Ethan sat alone, hunched forward, eyes fixed on the floor. Janelle leaned in. "Do you want to speak to him again?" Naomi shook her head. "No, some silence needs to echo." They turned back toward their seats. As they did, a flight attendant held out an envelope, eyes brimming. "We didn't know what was happening, Madam Chairwoman," she said. "But we know now. Please accept this. It's our crew's handwritten statement of support for Ubuntu Ethics Trust. Every name is there. Naomi took the envelope with both hands. "This matters more than you know," she replied. Back at her seat, Naomi settled in. The baby cap sat in her lap again, finished, flawless, red like truth. Janelle opened a small leather case from her bag and removed a pin. Gold, round, with the Ubuntu symbol at the center. She leaned forward and pinned it over Naomi's heart. "You've always had it," she said quietly. "Now the world sees it." Naomi looked out the window. Below them, the ocean stretched endlessly, reflecting the sun in brilliant streaks of gold and sapphire. Janelle asked, "What will you call this moment when history looks back?" Naomi answered without hesitation, "A correction." In real time, social media lit up with hashtags. Naomi Mensa, Nach Ubuntu Ethics Trust, Nach Power with Grace. The correction. Every image showed Naomi walking the aisle. No crown, no cape, no speech, just presence. The kind of presence that changes policy without raising a voice. In the final moments of the flight, as the cabin lights dimmed in preparation for descent, the intercom crackled softly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We will begin our descent into New York momentarily. We thank you for flying with us today." There was a pause. Then the captain added, his voice warmer, "And on behalf of this crew, and, I suspect, this entire planet, we thank one passenger in particular for reminding us what power looks like when it's worn with humility." No one cheered, but no one needed to. The message was already stitched into the story, and the story had already become legend. The wheels of the aircraft kissed the tarmac with a subtle tremor. The soft screech of rubber against runway echoed briefly, followed by the gentle sway of deceleration. The plane had landed, but something far more profound had already arrived long before the jet reached New York. Power, redefined. Agent Collins appeared once more, this time approaching Ethan with quiet precision. There were no handcuffs, no shackles, just protocol. "Mr. Blake," he said, voice neutral, "please gather your belongings. You'll be escorted off the aircraft separately." Ethan nodded. There was no fight left. His movements were sluggish, heavy, not with exhaustion, but with understanding. He stood, his designer shoes no longer symbols of status, but reminders of the back they had once pressed against. He took one final glance toward Naomi's row. She was seated again, knitting. The red yarn slid smoothly through her fingers. The cap now nearly finished, its shape elegant, its warmth visible even without touch. Janelle stood beside her, arms folded gently. She saw Ethan approach and stepped aside. He stood there silently, unsure if he should speak. Naomi looked up, not with malice, not with triumph, with clarity. "I want to say," Ethan began, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Thank you." Naomi paused her knitting. Her fingers remained on the wool, but her eyes met his fully. "You don't owe me thanks," she said evenly. "You owe yourself honesty." He swallowed. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness." Naomi was quiet for a moment, then said, "Forgiveness is not a transaction." Ethan looked down. "So, what happens now?" Naomi folded the cap carefully, placing it into her pouch one last time. Then she stood. The entire cabin held its breath. She walked to within inches of him, her frame small but radiating a presence that seemed to fill every corner of the aircraft. "I forgive you," she said. Ethan blinked. "But," she added, "you will never step foot in the investment world again. You will not sit on a board, fund a startup, or hold advisory power. Not with my influence, not in this generation." His lips parted slightly. It wasn't shock. It wasn't pain. It was relief. He nodded slowly, as if realizing this was more mercy than he'd earned. "And if you're lucky," Naomi continued, "you'll take this exile not as punishment, but as liberation." She turned and walked back to her seat. Ethan didn't follow. Collins placed a hand on his shoulder and gently guided him toward the forward exit. He didn't resist. Outside, black SUVs waited near the jet bridge. They weren't for arrest. They were for distance, for quiet exits, for the kind of endings that didn't require cameras. Ethan stepped into one without a word. The door shut. He was gone. Inside the cabin, Naomi remained seated. The pouch sat atop her lap, the red cap perfectly folded within it, complete. Janelle sat beside her again, silent. The final boarding music began to play softly through the cabin speakers, but it wasn't the usual sterile jingle. This time, it was strings, soft, rising, a swelling note, a crescendo of resolution. As passengers began retrieving their bags and stretching their limbs, many paused to glance her way. Some smiled. Others gave small, respectful nods. No one interrupted her. They knew better. She had become myth within the span of a single flight. Not because she fought, but because she never raised her voice while shifting the sky. Outside the terminal, a crowd had already gathered. Journalists, supporters, protesters holding signs that read, "Justice is a journey. She stood so we could see," and "Power without kindness is nothing." But Naomi would not walk through that door. She would take a different route, unseen, silent, like the lesson she had become. Later that evening, a video surfaced online. It wasn't a leak. It was released intentionally. A quiet, uncaptioned clip, 73 seconds long, shot from the aisle during the flight's final descent. It showed Naomi, head bowed, red yarn between her fingers, knitting. No narration, no graphics, just the soft swish of yarn, the measured breath of a woman who had rewritten the rules of justice without shouting once. The video ended with a wide shot of her hand tying the final knot on the red cap. Then, fade to black. Music swelled online as the video went viral. Comments flooded in by the millions. "I've never cried over someone knitting before. She's not a CEO. She's a spiritual correction." This is what legacy looks like in motion. Across platforms, people shared their own stories of humiliation. Stories of moments when they'd been silenced, dismissed, laughed at. The red cap became a symbol of dignity, of resistance, of elegance under fire. Some even began knitting their own. In Ghana, a mural began to take shape outside a school in Accra. Naomi's likeness, head wrapped, shawl flowing, red cap in her lap, was painted with the words beneath it, "Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering with clarity and choosing peace." Back in New York, in a quiet office overlooking Central Park, Naomi placed the finished cap into a small gift box. She tied it with twine and wrote a note. "For the child of tomorrow, may the world be softer under your feet than it was under mine." She handed it to a staff member who would ensure it reached her daughter. Then she turned to her desk and opened the next case, because the work wasn't done. Not yet. But the world, it had changed, and this time, it had paid attention.